This week's channel message from the angels is giving us more information about what this ascension and change in consciousness is really all about. And this week, they're talking about the shift away from the dominance of the mind. So it's the subjugation of the mind and the elevation of the heart, how we are going to be much more heart led. But they get into the specifics of that. What is that really going to look like? And how do we get there? How do we live it? And what does it mean for us? So, welcome back to my channel, you guys. If this is your first time here, my name is Ann Tucker. I am a trance channel. I channel from the angelic realm and I channel healing and information. I do that by going into a deep meditative state. I raise my awareness up as high as I can go. I go a little higher, I connect, and they start to come through. So, and recently the angels have been giving us a lot of information about this ascension process, filling in the blanks. What does it mean when we talk about ascension? What does it mean when we talk about living in the now, right? They're starting to get more detail to give us a greater understanding of what this is, because the time is now, right? We are in the midst of it, and you guys are the way showers. So if you want to see more messages like this one, please don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Thanks so much.
Here's what they have to say. We are stating our remembrance of all that is opening at this time. In our view, all has opening, excuse me, in our view, all has opening as its passage. All things genuflect in the passage of God's light and receive its blessing. So, and I like that they use this idea that all things genuflect in the passage of God's light. And I think this understanding is the way that they speak always has so many layers of meaning, that their words are not chosen easily, that there's usually multiple layers underneath, and you can look at it and go deeper and deeper and deeper into what they say. But if they're saying here that everything, or say there are remembrance of all that is opening at this time, in our view, all has opening as its passage. So the passage to get closer to source is through opening, and that's for everything and everyone. And they say all things genuflect in the passage of God's light and receive its blessing. So I think this is important because of our cultural understanding of what it has been in the past to connect or relate to spirit, to God, to the angels, that there has been this idea of to submit, right? To genuflect is to get down on one knee. And think about in so much of our religious understanding, there's this idea of submit to the will of God, right? Submit to, and that submitting, and it comes back from like the knights and kings, how they had to get down on one knee and they had to sort of pledge, and it was all about submission, right? Submission to the will of someone else. And that is not what they want us to do. Like, we're not supposed to submit. It's supposed to be about opening. So it's this idea of recasting the idea. The genuflect, the getting down on one knee, is about being receptive, about being open. It's about laying down our barriers and our blocks and becoming open to God's light. All right, and God's light and receive its blessings. So the next paragraph. Through now, this time you are in, these times of changing, you are all in messaging that which takes on form within the self. You are understanding through this process the need to be balanced, to lean down into your own memory of self and draw in the hounding disciples that tear you far from here. These resounding voices are disparate and preventative. They cull you apart into many halves of separation and instill in your blood a scene of not joy, but fabricated pain, a pain of your own creation. Whoa. Yeah, they nailed it. And ouch, it's so true. Sometimes the truth hurts. Okay, so they're saying in this paragraph, they're saying that you are all in messaging what takes on form within the self. And I understand that to mean that we are all in this process of learning about ourselves, creating meaning. So it's like messaging, it's like creating meaning of that which takes on form within the self, meaning of ourselves, our soul, our spirit. Who are we? We're trying to understand ourselves, right? And they say, you are understanding through this process the need to be balanced. And so this is true. Like, this is the whole journey. When we are born, the whole journey is about trying to balance our masculine and our feminine energy. And we come in, and that's our karma, everything of our, our wounds. We have a mother and we have a father, and they each create the junk that we are meant to carry that pulls us out of balance. So the journey forward, the journey towards wholeness, is balancing the male and female energies inside of us. And that's a process. It's like a little on the female, a little on the male. Like when I'm working with my clients, I'll see, we'll volley back and forth. Okay, here's an issue on the feminine that came from here, and we'll heal that. And then immediately it's back to the masculine, and then back to the feminine, right? And it's a balancing process. And Donna's saying, "Ugh, I know, right? This paragraph is a doozy." You say, "Wow, fabricated pain of our own creation." I know it got me too. So yeah. So okay. So we are understanding through this process, the need to be balanced. It's first of all, there's the understanding ourselves, and then there's understanding what we're supposed to do with it. Like that we're supposed to try to get into balance. And that's the goal. But that's the goal of our healing, is to balance the male and female. And when that happens, by the way, you get male and female, and then you get this trifecta. You get this third energy that comes up. And I it's hard to describe because I know it and I've experienced it and I've worked with it, but I can't. The angels have to talk about it because I cannot put it into words. But when these two harmonize, you get this third thing that comes into play. All right, so the lean down, they go on to say, same paragraph, they say to lean down into your own memory of self and draw in the hounding disciples, so that tear you far from here. So I understand that the hounding disciples are all the little aspects. They're the disciples of yourself, like all those little pieces of yourself that you leave here, and all those bits of unprocessed emotion and feeling, those are the hounding disciples, right, that tear you far from here. And they say these resounding voices, these loud voices in your head, are disparate and preventative. So disparate is they're separating, right? Separating into differences. So making you into many different pieces of yourself. And they're preventative. So they're preventing you from achieving this wholeness inside of yourself, right? So they pull you apart into many halves of separation and instill in your blood a scene not of joy, but of fabricated pain, a pain of your own creation. So they're saying this is it's all on us. We are doing this to ourselves in this life, right? And we're born into it. Not to say that it's easy, because it's not. Like, and you can't help. Like once you get here, you can't help the pain that we have. It comes from, and we choose it when we get here. We choose to recreate these situations that will bring this up so that we can experience it here and clear it. But know that once we get to adulthood, like it's all on us. It's up to us to know it, as they're saying here very clearly, to create meaning out of what we learn about ourselves, to understand the need to be balanced, to work through that, right? To get rid of these hounding disciples. It's all on us. And you're saying, yes, and this situation happened yesterday that started pulling me back into the angry Edie that I used to thrive in. Oh, how interesting. And how awesome that you have noticed a shift from that, right? You're saying, as I was going that way, people are getting angrier and angrier. Something in my body lit up and said, no, please. Oh my gosh. I was able to pull myself out of the reactive motions and settle. However, the body stress was so intense, I ended up making my stomach sick. Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. I healed up within the next 3 hours, but it was mind blowing how my anger manifested in my body, and I hurt myself without meaning to. Wow. Yeah, that is super interesting. And what a phenomenal trigger right now, as we are in this Lionsgate energy, to look at that, like to spend time with that, and to speak to your anger, right? To maybe take a moment and let the anger speak to you and find out what's in there, because there's layers to it, I'm sure. And what a right opportunity. It sounds like it's right on the surface, ready to move. So I would definitely take advantage of that. But very, very cool that you had presence through that. Super cool, Edie. All right. Next paragraph. These times of changing are wrought in the heavens and on earthly plane. They are destined to overtake what is, to resoundingly alter the frequency of all that remains. And this passage through life and living separates you now from that time before, where all things culminated in your own thinking. The mind has had its day, and no longer. No longer shall this passage of time living on earth be bound to mind's fantasy. Now instills in yourselves a switch to another portion of your humanity, to open the self to receive the frequency of God living. to live as he is, unencumbered by phantasmic obstacles that you have created, to stay in the vibration of oneness with all things. So yeah, so here it really is about that we are moving from this space where, as I say, where all things culminated in your own thinking. They're saying the mind has had its day and no longer. So we have been in a society, we've been the whole way we are, not only we are conditioned, but the way our bodies have been in terms of how we have learned to survive has been through reliance on the mind. And think about how like even in society, how it's been more and more and more about like research and data and pulling things apart in order to understand them into their many different pieces. And it's been all about the mind. And they're saying that that is no longer going to be in the new state of being. They're saying that we're moving away from that and we're moving into this, and they refer to it as these phantasmic obstacles. Like the mind is, when the mind takes over, I think is their point, is that it no longer helps us. That the mind, even though it helps us to understand our reality, it helps us to survive in what has been this 3D world, chasing the things that we think have been important, which actually aren't. That all of these things the mind has been very useful for. But in terms of the things that really matter, in terms of our connection to ourselves and the oneness and all this kind of stuff, the mind gets in the way. And Don says, phantasmic obstacles sounds much sexier than ego mind. I think we all have to say that from now on. Phantasmic obstacles. It does sound way sexier. You're right. Thank you for that. All right. Next paragraph. A shifting, yes, has taken place in some and all things. This method, practice of divesting from what was, occurs in any instance where life boils beyond the point of its own existence and requires renewal. There is the opportunity to raise the awareness, as you would call it, the opening, as we would refer to it, an opening of all things. For there is nothing between yourselves and ourselves except the closed offering of the mind's pattern. The reception to ourselves is not housed there. The heart's method of feeling is where unity is found, where our breath is felt, where God's light shines most freely. So, and I love that they say this, where God's light shines most freely. They're saying it's not that it doesn't shine everywhere, because it does, right? The God's light shines on your mind, but most freely in the heart. So I like that they referred that it's not like you can only feel it in the heart. But this, I think, really gets to the meat of it, is where they're saying, yeah, a shifting has taken place. This method, a practice of divesting from what was, occurs in any instance. So basically, they're saying anytime, any life form that gets to this point where we are now, any life form, like you imagine this anywhere in the universe, where they get to a place where, as they describe it, where life broils beyond the point of its own existence and requires renewal. So there's this idea that everything everywhere is in constant state of evolution, and that at any point where it gets to this place where it broils, where it can't stay in the context, like think of a snake shedding its skin. It gets to a point where it cannot stay inside that same wrapping. Something has to change. And so when that happens, this process of opening, it's an opening process that leads them into the next stage. So it's just like with the snake and its skin. It has to open. The skin has to open, and the snake has to come out of it to become something new. So, and I love that they say there is nothing between yourselves and ourselves except the closed offering of the mind's pattern. So this is that idea that, and the reason I think this is so important is that as long as we're stuck in this paradigm where everything is governed by the mind is it's like a closed system. And it's like, think about how people have always talked about religion, and this is not religion, but they're talking about how it's always been about proof. Like people say, well, scientists will say, I will believe it when it's repeatable and I can prove it. And there's this self-referencing that happens within the mind where it can't open up to new stimuli very, very easily, right? It's looking for proof and for evidence and for things like that. So it's like it's a closed system in a way. And you can have a really, really open mind and be interested in new things, but the mind perceives things that it already knows. It perceives things that it already understands. We see what we're expecting to see. And this gets back to the whole thing they've been talking about our expectations, about how that if we are expecting to see something, that's what we're going to see. So we have to move beyond our expectations. We have to leave those behind. So it's the same thing with the mind. Like the expectations come from the mind. So yeah, so it's just kind of all of this stuff kind of starts to click in together like pieces of a puzzle. All right, so the heart method of feeling. So getting into this heart is where unity is found, where the breath of the angels is felt, and where God's light shines most freely. Right, next paragraph, they say, this passage we speak of now, a passage all things are beckoned through, where you are understanding yourselves consciously to make it through, to make a choice of transition, to find your way into this new state of being by proximity to ourselves and each other, by felt knowledge of a shift and opening, by revealing in the self that all that is real and exists within you. So this is really saying that this is the passage they're talking about. The passage, this is our ascension as we're moving into this new state of awareness, new state of consciousness. And they're saying that we are understanding ourselves consciously. So this, for us, for humans, this is a choice. And that's a big part of what makes this unique and awesome, is that we're going through a choice to make this transition. And they're saying that doing that is through the felt proximity to themselves. So you may come in your aha moments, in terms of these moments of opening, where we get out of the mind's pattern and we get out of those ways of thinking that, and our expectations and the ways that we limit ourselves, that it may come from a breath of an angel that happens to just bring you up for air for just a minute, right? It could be a felt knowledge of the shift in the opening. So you may start to perceive around you that things are different. You may have knowings in the body. You may have intuitive knowings, right? And by revealing in the self that all that is real and exists within you. So it comes that as we go through our process of healing and we start to feel more and more of that oneness, and we start to feel our connection to all things, right? That balance. All right, next paragraph. This passage is not novel, but in the self, the choosing, this is to be had here. This is novel. This method of bridging your awareness through the chaos of the self, through the obstacles of the mind's patterning, to subjugate what was once the governing factor of humanity, the Lord and Master, the logic brain, the mind of worshipful self-reference. This is to be discarded not, but to be remembered as it is intended, as an aid to human life form, as an instrument to be availed of, to be released in its torrent of nothing thoughts and left fallow when not needed, to be seen as nothing more than an instrument that harbors the thoughts and references to be pulled upon as needed, to ponder the thinking as you have done no longer needed, to feel, to be, to essence form your thinking, mind its patterns all away, and conform to being of a mind with all things. So it's really about this idea of it's such a massive cultural shift to subjugate the mind to the heart, to take the mind down and move it down beneath the power of the heart, right? And they say that doesn't mean that we're discarding it. They're saying it's not to be discarded, but to remember it as it's intended. And that's going to be, I think, the subtle part that might be challenging for us, is to figure out. It almost would be easier if we could say, great, just the lobotomy. Let's just forget it. Let's forget I ever had a mind. Let's just get rid of it. It's the how do I do it, where it's like, okay, it's just not as important. It's below the heart and I'm not supposed to discard it, but how am I supposed to use it without over? It's like going cold turkey is sometimes easier, but keeping it around, you have to learn a new way of working with the mind. And I think this is something that will become easier because the world is changing around us and we will get to this point culturally. But as the way showers, as the people who are stepping into these energies before, like you are starting to hold the vibration of being in this way, then it's on us to figure out how to do this, to do it before it's easy, right? And so it's really, they're saying it's about, so we subjugate it beneath the heart. And I love how they refer to that it's an instrument to be availed of, to be released in its torrent of nothing thoughts. They're like monkey mind, right? Like just let it go. And it is about, and we pull upon it when needed. But the idea is that this thinking about things, overthinking about things, is this idea of staying in the moment, And they're going to talk about this in these upcoming paragraphs, that it's really about getting to a space where the things that we need to know come from our connection to all that is. And so it's trying to lean into that idea that if you need to understand something, you understand it by connecting, not by analyzing. So, all right, next paragraph. They say, and they say that in the last bit of this previous paragraph, they say, to ponder, to think as you have done, no longer needed. To feel, to be, to essence form your thinking. Mind its patterns all away and conform to being of a mind with all things. So let's pull that apart a little bit. They say to ponder, to think as you have done. So that's that, like that analyzing, the logic, no longer needed. To feel. So we're going to find our way through feeling. So already, like when you're trying to make decisions, here's a big one. You can logic and analyze the decision to death, or you just feel into your heart and you say, which of these is most joyful? And you trust that. And honestly, that is how I make all of my business decisions now, is I look at it and I say, what sounds most fun to me? And I trust my heart, and it has not led me wrong. And it's a huge departure from how I would have done it in the past. But it really works, and it takes that trust, right? It takes a lot of trust. So then they say to essence form your thinking. So it's really that essence is your soul. They refer to the soul as the essence. To essence form your thinking. Then here they're referring to conform to being of a mind with all things. So that's where the knowledge will be, is this idea of connecting in order to find our answers. And we will get to that state, right? And that's, I think we can be easy on ourselves and say, okay, for a while here, there's certain things that we need to know in the traditional sense, because we're not there yet, but we got to try. We got to start making these steps. The awareness is the first step, but we got to start trying to get to this place where we are subjugating the mind. Yeah. And you're saying, speaking to the difference of the trauma brain and prefrontal reasoning brain, and the latter in inaccessible without surrender and trust. That's interesting, Don. That's an interesting thought. So you think, so the latter being, so the prefrontal reasoning brain is inaccessible. The latter, yeah, is inaccessible without surrender and trust. So I'm not totally following. Maybe can you explain a little bit more what you're thinking? Because I'm not super following. But it's interesting. I'm intrigued. Okay, so the next paragraph here, they say, the separation of yourselves into disparate beings, the egoic self of identity does survive, and for some time coming. It lives and breathes to dignify and isolate your method of expression of the source light you carry. But this designation does not form in thinking. You are not what you know. You are what you do, how you are to behave, how you feel. What you think robs you now of presence. The mind's patterns fall away to process all things through the collective understanding. So that's exactly what we were just talking about. So the patterns fall away and we process all things through the collective understanding. So this is what we're going to get to. And that's the goal, is to try to get to that place. So, and in between is, I know so many of you are super intuitive, and you may have now those moments where you just have an intuitive knowing, right? Where you're wondering about something or you're looking at something and then boom, it just comes in and you just know it. And that's a cool feeling, right? And there's times you don't even know how you know it, you just know it. Like I remember, I think I told you guys, I was watching a TV show and there was a guy on it, and I knew as I was watching it that he had just had some sort of like throat surgery. Like I knew, even though he wasn't showing it in any way. I just all of a sudden it just landed. It's like, oh, this guy just had some sort of really bad throat surgery, throat problems. And then like the following year, there was like a reunion event or a reunion episode, and he came on and he revealed through the whole thing he had just had like massive throat cancer removed. And so I have no idea how I knew it, but it was just that. And I think that's and so if you can pull onto those sorts of experiences that you have had, those sudden knowings, those like, how do I know this? I'm not sure. The feelings, like I think this is the case. That doing more of that will get us there, I think. All right. And so processing things through the collective understanding. And so the last paragraph here, they said, the feeling of all things carries information not currently available to yourselves, and the mind now takes up its vigilance in this absence. But as you move into your next destiny, the truth of what you are and of all things is revealed to now through feeling. And this eternity, the now on offer, contains all thinking in a moment's time. No reflection is needed. It is a moving from a state of reflective processing into a state of being. So this is the prescription. This is what they're telling us. This is what we need to start to try to do and to try to be open to this. And getting to this state is all the things they've been telling us about releasing our expectations and being open and all this kind of stuff. Getting to this being emptied out, right? That's necessary. For the more that we are emptied out and living in the now, then the more of this intuitive knowledge, this knowing, this connection to all things will start to come in. And so the feeling of all, I'm going to repeat it, the feeling of all things carries information not currently available to yourselves. So this is that idea that through feeling, and I know that on the spirit plane, when you meet another soul on the spirit plane, you meet them and you feel their essence, and you have much more depth of an understanding of who that person, who that soul is, than you ever could through our way of knowing each other here on the earth plane. That there's this connection that forms where you see them truly, right? And that's the kind of idea, the feeling of all things that carries information not currently available to yourselves. So it's like beyond extrasensory perception. It's a depth of perceiving something for the truth of it, for the truth of who it or what it is, right? And they say, and the mind now takes up its vigilance in the absence. So as the veil drops, we lose that connection or have lost that connection. So we have the mind. The mind takes over and says, okay, I will fill in the blanks. You can't feel what everybody is anymore. Okay, mind steps in. I will logic my way to come up with an understanding of what that is, so that you can process people and put them into buckets and understand them through your preconceived ideas of who you think they are, right? But as you move into your next destiny, so as we're moving forward, the truth of what you are and all things is revealed to now through feeling. So as we're moving through this, it's almost like the veil is thinning, like we've all been talking about, and more of this intuitive understanding, this connection that we've been missing, more and more of this can come back. So they're saying, and this eternity, they refer to now as the eternity because it's the eternal now. Now is always this eternity, the now on offer, contains all thinking in a moment's time. So it is, and this just happened in a session I did with a client just the other day, where they were needing to unweave a protection that had been put in place by another being, and because the person had outgrown it. And in order to do that, they called in the other being. And I could see, because when I'm channeling, I don't always follow the words, but they show me. I'm like a little fly on the wall and I'm watching, and they show me images and I can see what's going on. And I saw the other entities where they show me the energy, the other energy. And there's a moment, an instantaneous, the information, the comprehension is just there. But they take time together in the exchange of knowing each other's energy. So all the interaction was about, like, we are these angels, and then this I am this other being, right? And it was all about the understanding of the truth of each one. And the knowledge passage was like, boom, done. It was like, meh, okay, it happened so fast. So, and I think that's what they're talking about it, that it's in an instant, right? And in this eternity, like the eternal now, contains all thinking in a moment's time. No reflection is needed. So it's not like you have to then, you get something, a piece of information, and then you have to think it through and try to reflect and try to understand it in the context as it relates to yourself. None of that. It's like you understand it in depth. It's like you've read the instruction manual. You know it, right? And then you say, they say no reflection is needed. It is moving from a state of reflective processing into a state of being. So this is where we're headed, and this is where we're trying to get to. And I think they're telling us this because even though, like, it will get easier over time, and eventually all of humanity will get to this point, but they will get there because we are holding the frequency, because we are taking the first steps. So, and you know the feeling, you know that feeling of instantaneous knowing, of unexplained connection, right? Where you know a thing. And so it's leaning into that. And then what are the other ways that you can look into your life? Like for me, it's with decisions. It works so beautifully to subjugate the mind. And yeah, I will have to use the mind in terms of then the practical part of making it happen, for sure. But the choice part comes from I let the heart lead. And so there's a bunch of other ways in our life, I think, that we can do the same thing. What other ways can we subjugate our minds and let the heart take the front step and start to increasingly hold this energy of being more present in the heart than in the mind? And Donna's explaining, in our trauma brain, we are imprisoned, fear, fight, flight, And the surrender allows the breath and God light. Oh, yes. Okay. Awesome. Thank you for explaining that. I know now I'm following you. So only then can we know there's awareness in the reasoning brain that dropping into our heart is the now on offer and the feeling path opens. Thank you so much. That's beautifully said. Yeah. And Rebecca saying, I love this idea of the eternal now. Me too. Reflective immediately. Yeah. And unexplained connection is the joy of these times, isn't it? Yeah, I totally agree. Like having those moments when you do connect to that unexplained knowing is like it's magic. It's absolutely magic. So yay for that. Yay for that. So I'm like, it's one of those things as a homework assignment. I'm like, sign me up. And if there's energies to support this, I think there's probably no accident that we're getting these messages during the Lion's Portal. That if there's more energy accessible for us to start to do this, to receive this. So it's just really focusing, like they've been telling us, to release those expectations, empty ourselves out, be ready for what is not expected, be ready for what we couldn't have imagined. And that's the only way that it can drop in. You're saying, I love hearing from the angels and how similar their messages are to what other perspectives are giving now as well. It's layers upon layers of confirmation. Isn't that the best? I absolutely agree that I find that it is having it spoken in a bunch of different ways so that we receive it on all the many levels that we are. Yeah. All right, you guys, thank you so much for joining me for Friday Live today. It was great to spend the morning with you. I hope you have a phenomenal weekend, and I will see you next Friday Live. Bye, you guys.